Hello ladies and gents, and this is the City of London Cemetery, and this contains two, possibly three, of the Jack the Ripper victims, aka Martha Tabram, Ann Nichols and Catherine Eddowes. Now this cemetery is very big, so the walk from the gate here to their graves, which are right towards the back of the cemetery, would take up the greater part of a video. So I'll get you there another way, in case any of you want to ever go and visit the graves and find your way. And we'll be visiting the first of the graves. So, off we go. And as I said, this cemetery is absolutely vast. So it would take quite some time to walk you from the main gate, which is here, to where we need to be, which is Gardens Way. So we start off at the main gate, which I've just marked off with a red circle. You go in and you turn right, and you're going to head along this path here. It's signposted, and you'll be heading for the traditional crematorium, which is here. And this fine old looking chapel is the traditional crematorium. You'll then want to walk behind the back of the traditional crematorium, just a little short road here, until you come to this little intersection here, which brings you on to Gardens Way, which is this row along here, and it is here, here, and here, and just in there are Ripper victims, conveniently enough, all lie in the same area. So a nice little aerial shot from the main gate to Gardens Way, and we'll begin. And you now join me on Gardens Way in the City of London Cemetery, and you see how vast this cemetery is. It really is a big cemetery. But interestingly enough for us, within this one relatively small spot of Gardens Way are quite a few of our victims and potential victims as well. So let me introduce you to the memorial stone, which was only placed here in 2019 for Martha Tabram. Now, we met Martha and learned about her story in the White Hart pub, didn't we, at Whitechapel? And she was found dead just behind there. 7th of August 1888 was her murder. Now, her inquest wasn't held until the 23rd of August 1888, so the body would have been released for burial after that time. Many experts have scoured the records of this cemetery, the City of London Cemetery, and can't find a burial entry for Martha, although many claim that she is buried in this cemetery in a mass unmarked pauper's grave. I'm not so sure about that, because the Victorians, particularly if you were a pauper or fell upon the parish and you cost them money, things were pretty well recorded. So, as other people say, Martha is buried somewhere in the East End, possibly here, but this is just a memorial stone for her. And as we discussed, many, including a few of the experts, actually claim Martha to be the first of Jack the Ripper's victims. What do you think? But before we head on to the next one, which are other potential victims. And here you see the death certificate for Martha Tabram. Martha Tabram died 7th of August 1888, George Yard Buildings, aged 39, the wife of Henry Tabram, a packer. And we have got cause of death: violent willful murder against some person or persons unknown. Signature or description of the informant. The certificate was received from Wynne Baxter, coroner for Middlesex, and the inquest was held from the 9th till the 23rd of August 1888, and the death was registered on the 25th of August 1888. And this is what I mean about the rigorous registration processes of the Victorian era. If she was buried, I think there'll be a burial entry for her. Something we have to consider, and it's something quite unpleasant. Martha's estranged husband, or the parish, whoever would have been responsible for her burial, may have not wanted to foot that bill. So another possibility for a missing burial entry for Martha is that her body could have been given to medical science to be anatomised. That did happen sometimes, and it could explain why no one, including experts, have been able to find a burial entry for her. But on a more cheerful note, the face of Martha Tabram. Before we leave Martha, it is customary, and you do see it quite often on a lot of the Rippers victims' graves, to leave coins. This is done to show acknowledgement that you've been here and remembered their memory, of course. And also what we have to bear in mind with some of our ladies is all they needed was 4p to get them a night's bed in a coffin bed in one of the homeless shelters. So on that note, very much a God bless you to Martha Tabram, who may or may not have been Jack the Ripper's first victim. Now, as I said with Martha, some of the experts actually claim her for his first victim. But where I'm going to take you to now is a very interesting little spot. Of course, on Gardens Way, our memorial stones, luckily for us, are all located here. Two of them actually mark the approximated last resting places. 3 of them don't. Now we come to Mary Ann Nichols, the actually acknowledged first victim of Jack the Ripper, or one of the colloquial 5 as they're known. But many do claim that there were more victims. Of course, we discussed Mary Ann on night 1 and learned all about her tragic case in the tour, didn't we? But as I said, it's burials and resting places. Mary Ann Nichols was buried on the afternoon of the 6th of September 1888. She was laid to rest in the City of London Cemetery, located within the East London district of Manor Park. Her body was transported to the cemetery in a hearse supplied by a Hanbury Street undertaker named Henry Smith. The funeral cortege consisted of a hearse carrying her coffin and 2 mourning coaches which carried her father, estranged husband, and 3 of her children. Several thousand people observed the cortege travel from the mortuary to the cemetery. Nichols' coffin was of polished elm, with a brass plaque bearing the inscription Mary Ann Nichols, aged 42, died 31st of August 1888. She was buried in a public grave, grave number 210752, on the edge of the current memorial garden. In 1996, the cemetery authorities decided to formally mark Nichols' unmarked grave with a plaque. So, this is the memorial garden, and they were later reused, as you can see, for cremations. So nicely enough, Mary Ann will still be under here and undisturbed. So Mary Ann is the first acknowledged victim. But before we leave her memorial and last resting place, and here is the death certificate for Mary Ann Nichols, also known as Polly Nichols. Mary Ann Nichols died the 31st of August 1888 in the street in Bucks Row, aged 42 years, wife of William Nichols, a printing machinist at the lodging house at 35 Dorset Street, Spitalfields. Her cause of death is violent something, and it's a word that looks like syncope. Violent something from loss of blood, from wounds in neck and abdomen, inflicted by some sharp instrument, willful murder against some person or persons unknown, post-mortem, and the signature and description of the residence of the informant. The certificate was received by Wynne Baxter, coroner for Middlesex, and the inquest was held between the 1st and the 31st of September, with an adjournment on the 22nd of September 1888, and the death was registered on the 25th of September 1888. But we know that sometime between the 1st and the 6th that the coroner released her body for burial. Because I've upped my ante a little bit here, or been able to, you've got the original burial records from the City of London Cemetery, and it's the original burial entry for Mary Ann Nichols, and she is burial 210752, buried on September the 6th, 1888, Mary Ann Nichols, residence Whitechapel, Stepney, aged 42, and the body was released, or the district, and it's got here, Wynne Baxter, coroner for Middlesex, and the parish from which she came is St Mary's, Whitechapel, a lost church, and also from where Whitechapel got its name, because the original church, St Mary's at Whitechapel, was white, and that's where that area got its name from, interestingly enough. She's buried in square 318 in grave 210752, and it is a second-class common burial, consecrated grave, and that is the original burial entry for Mary Ann Nichols. And on a more cheerful note, that lovely cheerful face of hers. And it was a cheerful face as well, wouldn't it, when you look into those eyes, and lovely to see a Victorian person smiling in their photographs. It's not often the way. Says a lot about her character, that. As we leave Mary Ann Nichols behind, the acknowledged first of our victims, like with Martha Tabram, we leave twopence and a God bless you to her memory. And from Mary Ann, the first acknowledged victim, I take you now, still on Gardens Way, to the fourth acknowledged victim. Catherine Eddowes, died 30th of September 1888, and she is the acknowledged fourth victim of Jack the Ripper. So, buried within sight of Ann Nichols, who's just there, and Martha Tabram's memorial stone, which is just there, and somewhere else where we're going to be going in a minute, which is just in there. And with Catherine Eddowes, before we leave her little spot here, Catherine Eddowes was buried on the afternoon of Monday, the 8th of October 1888. She was laid to rest in an unmarked public grave at grave number 49336, square 318, in the City of London Cemetery. In a service conducted by the Reverend Dunscombe, her coffin was of polished elm and bore a plate inscribed with the words, "Catherine Eddowes, died 30th September 1888, aged 43 years. Numerous people lined the streets as the corsage, consisting of an open glass hearse drawn by horses, began the procession from Golden Lane Mortuary to the cemetery at precisely 1:30 p.m. A mourning coach containing John Kelly, 4 of Eddowes' sisters and 2 of her nieces followed the coffin. An estimated 500 people were present as her coffin arrived at the City of London Cemetery prior to interment. Today, the section of the cemetery where Eddowes was interred has been reused for part of a memorial garden for cremated remains. Eddowes lies beneath the garden way, in front of memorial bed 1849. In late 1996, the cemetery authorities decided to formally mark Eddowes' grave with a plaque. And before we leave her, and here we have the death certificate for Catherine Eddowes. I'm sorry it's such a poor copy, but it's the best that I could find. You've got Catherine Eddowes, otherwise Connie, otherwise Kitty, died 30th of September 1888, found dead in Mitre Square, aged 43 years, occupation, supposed single woman. Now that was sometimes in the Victorian era used as a euphemism for prostitutes. Her cause of death: a hemorrhage from cuts to arteries caused by a sharp object, or sharp instrument. Willful murder against some person unknown. Now the inquest began on the 5th of October, but was adjourned until the 11th of October. It began again on the 11th of October and concluded on the same day, so the 11th of October 1888, by Coroner for London Samuel F. Langham, with a verdict of willful murder against some person unknown. And once again, we have original burial records from the City of London burial registers, City of London Cemetery burial registers, and it's the burial entry for Catherine Eddowes, buried the 8th of October. And she's marked with the blue arrow, and she's burial 21190, buried 8th of October. Catherine Eddowes, aged 43 years, Samuel Langham, Coroner for London. And the section she is buried in, or the square she is buried in, is square 318, and it is grave 49336. Second class common interment in consecrated ground. Now, you'll remember with Ann Nichols, she was also buried in square 318. Now, in the modern world of today, a path goes right through that section, which is Gardens Way. But in the world of 1888, square 318 was a massive big section which was filled with common graves. So, although a path in our world separates their graves now, in the world of 1888 they would have been really buried in one section, unseparated by a path surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of other common graves, many marked simply with a common wooden cross, if marked at all, very few marked with headstones. And we actually get to see Catherine's funeral procession here as it begun. Photo credit to Jack the Ripper Tours for this one. And you can see Catherine's coffin being loaded on right into the hearse, being taken out from Golden Lane Mortuary, and over 500 people were present, so it was quite a big thing. And on a more cheerful note, the face of Catherine Eddowes. And as we leave Catherine Eddowes behind, like with Martha and Mary Ann, we leave twopence and a God bless you to her memory. And she was our fourth potential, or fourth acknowledged Jack the Ripper victim. But now to two more potentials whose graves, or memory really, was only acknowledged last year in 2023, at the end of 2023. And these two ladies are possibly, some think, Jack the Ripper's very first victims. Now these stones were only placed here at the end of last year, as I say. Emma Elizabeth Smith, 1843 to 1888, and Annie Millwood, 1850 to 1888. Now some claim that these were Jack the Ripper's very first victims, then Martha Tabram. So we'll go into a little bit of historical information about these two ladies. Were these two ladies actually Jack the Ripper's first victims? Emma Elizabeth Smith, born circa 1843 and murdered in 1888. Emma Elizabeth Smith, and she was murdered on the 4th, or died on the 4th of April 1888, aged 45, in Whitechapel. Prostitute, the suspected victim of Jack the Ripper. This is a contemporary illustration of Emma Smith because there are no known photographs of her. And these are illustrations from the newspapers of the time. Photo credit to Jack the Ripper Tours for these images. Emma Elizabeth Smith, 1843 to the 4th of April 1888, was a murder victim of mysterious origins in late 19th century London. Her killing was the first of the Whitechapel murders, and it is possible that she was a victim of the serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, though it is considered unlikely by most modern authors. Smith's life prior to her murder in 1888 remains mysterious. Police files were gathered during the investigation, but most of these are missing, apparently taken, mislaid, or discarded from the Metropolitan Police Archive before the transfer of papers to the Public Record Office. In the surviving records, Inspector Edmund Reed notes, a son and daughter living in Finsbury Park area. Walter Dew, a detective constable stationed with H Division, later wrote, her past was a closed book, even to her intimate friends. All she had ever told anyone about herself was that she was a widow who more than 10 years before had left her husband and broken away from all her early associations. There was something about Emma Smith which suggested that there had been a time when the comforts of life had not been denied her. There was a touch of culture in her speech, unusual in her class. Once Emma was asked why she had broken away so completely from her old life, she replied, a little wistfully, they would not understand now any more than they understood then. I must live somehow. At the time of her death in 1888, Smith had lived at a lodging house at 18 George Street, since renamed to Lolesworth Street, Spitalfields, in the East End of London, for approximately 18 months, paying 4p for a bed. Prior to being mortally assaulted, Smith was last seen by a fellow resident at 18 George Street, 54-year-old Margaret Hayes, at approximately 12:15 a.m. on Tuesday the 3rd of April 1888, the day after Easter Monday bank holiday. According to Hayes, Smith was standing near Farrant Street talking with a man dressed in dark clothing and a white scarf. She believed to have been attacked at the junction of Osborne Street and Brick Lane in Whitechapel, approximately 75 minutes later. The location of this assault was approximately 300 yards from her lodging house. She survived the attack, and although injured, managed to walk back to her lodging house. Upon her return to the lodging house, Smith told the deputy keeper, Mary Russell, that she had been attacked by 2 or 3 men, one of whom was a teenager. Miss Russell and one of the other lodgers, Annie Lee, took Smith to the London hospital, where she was treated by house surgeon George Haslip. She fell into a coma and died at 9 a.m. on the following day. Medical investigation by duty surgeon Dr. G.H. Hillier revealed that a blunt object had been inserted into her vagina, rupturing her peritoneum. The police were not informed of the incident until the 6th of April, when they were told an inquest was to be held the next day. The inquest was at the hospital and was conducted by the coroner for East Middlesex, Edwin Baxter, and was attended by Russell Hillier, the local chief inspector of the Metropolitan Police Service, H Division, Whitechapel, John West. The inquest jury returned a verdict of murder by persons or persons unknown. Chief Inspector West placed the investigation in the hands of Edmund Reed of H Division. Reed noted in his report that her clothing was in such dirty, ragged condition that it was impossible to tell if any part of it had been fresh torn. Walter Dew later described the investigation. As in every case in murder in this country, however poor or friendless the victims might be, the police made every effort to track down Emma Smith's assailant. Unlikely as well as likely places were searched for clues. Hundreds of people were interrogated, scores of statements were taken. Soldiers from the Tower of London, which stood within H Division, were questioned as to their movements. Ships in the dock were searched and sailors questioned. And here we see Local Inspector for Metropolitan Police Force, H Division, Whitechapel, Edmund Reed, in circa 1896. And here we see Inspector Walter Dew, 1863 to 1947. Smith had not provided descriptions of the men who had attacked her, and no witnesses came forward or were found. The investigation proved fruitless, and the murderer or murderers were never caught. The case was listed as the first of 11 Whitechapel murders in the Metropolitan Police files, although elements of the press linked her death to the later murders, which were blamed on the single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper. Her murder is unlikely to be connected with the later killings, with the exception of Walter Dew, who said that he thought that Smith was the first victim of the Ripper. The police suspected it was an unrelated work of a criminal gang. Smith either refused to or could not describe her attackers in any form or detail, possibly because she feared reprisal. Prostitutes were often managed by gangs, and Smith could have been attacked by her pimps or punished for disobeying them as part of their intimidation. And here we see the original burial entry for Emily Elizabeth Smith from the City of London burial registers, which I've scoured through, and a close-up for you. And here she is, right at the bottom, and she is burial 208627, buried on Thursday the 12th of April 1888 from Stepney Parish, and released by Carl's the coroner for Middlesex, parish of St Mary's, and she was given a second-class common grave in square 385, grave number 48195, in consecrated ground. And as they share plaques together, they share the same section, not the same grave, the two ladies, but they were buried in the same section. And his second potential victim, Annie Millwood, who shares that plot, that section, and the space where their plaques are. Annie Millwood, 1850 to 1888. And this is from the Jack the Ripper tour website, so credit to them for this. The widow of a soldier named Richard Millwood, Annie is 38 years of age in the winter of 1888. She lived at Spitalfields Chambers, 8 White's Row, Spitalfields, and might be called, though this is pure speculation, a prostitute. Annie was admitted to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary on Saturday the 25th of February 1888. The cause of her admission is reported to be stab wounds to the legs and lower torso. An article in the Eastern Post sheds a little more light on this matter. Bear with me while I get my magnifying glass, because this is tiny writing. A Whitechapel outrage. Strange death of the victim. This morning information was forwarded to Mr. Wynne E. Baxter of the death of Annie Millwood, aged 33, a single woman who is alleged to have been the victim of a most violent and brutal attack, and whose death is supposed to be due to the injuries so inflicted. It appears that a few weeks ago the deceased was admitted to the Whitechapel Infirmary, suffering from numerous stabs in the legs and lower parts of the body. She stated that she had been attacked by a man whom she did not know, and who stabbed her with a clasp knife. No one appears to have seen the attacker, and as far as present ascertained, there is only the woman's statement to bear out the allegations of an attack, though that she had been stabbed cannot be denied. After her admission to the infirmary, the deceased progressed favourably and was sent to the South Grove Workhouse but while engaged in some occupation at the rear of the building, she was observed to fall, and it was then found that she was dead. The coroner, on being communicated with, ordered a post-mortem examination made with a view of determining whether anyone was critically responsible for the death. And in her own words, the man is a stranger. The exact number of injuries is unknown. Regardless, Annie made a full recovery and was discharged on the 21st of March 1888, a little yet less than a month later, after her attack, and sent to the South Grove Workhouse in Mile End Road. And oddly enough, 10 days later, on the 31st of March, she collapsed and died in the backyard of the building whilst engaged in some occupation. Coroner Wyn Edwin Baxter led the inquest on the 5th of April 1888, and her death was attributed to sudden effusion into the pericardium caused by a rupture of the left pulmonary artery by ulceration. Death was therefore from natural causes, unrelated to the vicious attack suffered over a month earlier. Although rarely mentioned in connection with the Ripper murders, it is interesting to note that many similarities between this murder and that of Martha Tabram. You see unfortunately, the post-mortem photograph of Martha Tabram here. It is entirely possible that the man who attacked Martha Tabram attacked Annie Millwood, and in the light of recent suggestions of Martha Tabram as the Canonical sixth victim of the Ripper, there certainly needs to be more study into the attack on this earlier victims. And this is Spitalfields Chamber, 8 Whites Row, as it appeared in 1888, the time of the murder. And this is Whites Row today. And this is a burial entry for Annie Millwood, once again from the burial registers of the City of London Cemetery. And here you see her, she's marked with the arrow and the blue line. A close up for us. And she is burial 208580. And she's buried on Monday the 9th of April 1888. She's from Stepney. And W.E. Baxter, coroner for Middlesex, once again, and she's from the parish of St Mary's. And she was given a second-class common grave, square 385, grave number 48694, and it was a consecrated burial, consecrated ground. So, as I said, although not the same grave, she shares the same section as her sister. Not the sister in that sense, but you know what I mean. Emma Elizabeth Smith and Annie Millwood. The first and second possible victims. And Martha Tabram, the third victim, if you're going in date order of when they were murdered. And we get a view of the City of London cemetery gates as they would have known and recognised it if they ever passed it in life, but of course would have passed through this way in death, and this is a 19th century image, so pretty bang on from the time. And as we leave the City of London cemetery, I take you to another cemetery and to our next acknowledged victim. And we are here, Manor Park Cemetery and Crematorium, right at the end of Seabert Road. And it's for the grave of our second acknowledged victim, one of the colloquial five, Annie Chapman. Now this cemetery is absolutely vast and has more than one entrance. So to get to Annie's grave, you head in and straight to the chapel in the middle there, where you'll join me, which is here. Having passed on your right, of course, the grave of boy hero, Victoria Cross recipient, Jack Cornwall. So when you get to the chapel, you're then going to want to head to the rear gate over that way. And to do that, you'll walk behind the back of the chapel and you'll want to come onto Centre Drive here. So you've got the chapel behind you. And I'll now take you to Annie's grave. Well, the area where she's buried. Like with a few of our ladies, common grave, reused many years afterwards, once again by piling more earth on top. And that has once again been done in more recent times. And you're coming onto the intersection of Burge Road now. And its rear gate. It's quite a big cemetery, this one. And you're going to see this bench here on the right. Then, where the great big raven is, on this grave, you'll come to a little track. So, remember, Centre Drive with the church down there, straight along here to the bench, come to a little track. And this area here, now once again piled up with earth, under here somewhere is where Annie Chapman is buried. Now I covered this cemetery about a year ago, and if you look back at my footage, none of these new memorials and crosses and things were there then. So it was reused in the 40s by piling earth on top and then making new graves, and then in much more recent times it's been redone again like that. And this was the plaque we covered last year. This plaque is dedicated to the memory of Annie Chapman, died 8th of September 1888, a victim of the infamous Jack the Ripper. Her remains are buried within this area. And why I was so eager to come back and recover, because I could have used a snippet from my old footage. I'm going to take you to that reason now. Historic route, Annie Chapman. And this stone has only been installed fairly recently. Annie Chapman died the 8th of September. Annie was a tragic victim of the infamous Jack the Ripper. She is laid to rest within this area. May she rest in peace. Annie Chapman was buried shortly after 9 AM on the 14th of September 1888 in a service paid for by her family. She is laid to rest in a communal grave within Manor Park Cemetery, Forest Gate, East London. At the request of Chapman's family, the funeral was not publicised, with no mourning coaches used throughout the service, and only the undertaker and police and relatives knowing of these arrangements. Consequently, relatives were the only people to attend the service. A hearse supplied by Hanbury Street undertaker Henry Smith travelled to the Whitechapel mortuary in Montague Street to collect Chapman's body at 7 a.m. Her body was placed in an elm coffin draped in black and was then driven to Spitalfield's undertaker Harry Hawes, who arranged the funeral. Chapman's relatives met the hearse outside the cemetery. Her coffin plate bore the words, "Annie Chapman, died September the 8th, 1888, aged 48 years. The precise location of Annie Chapman's grave within the section of Manor Park Cemetery is unknown. A plaque in the cemetery by authorities was placed there in 2008, and her remains are buried within this area. And this is a description from July last year, so this new memorial for Annie, which is a much finer and more fitting one, is brilliant. And before we leave Annie, and here you see Annie Chapman's death certificate. I'm sorry it's not the greatest copy once again, but it helps for our references. And she died on the 8th of September 1888 at 29 Hanbury Street. Annie Chapman, aged 47, she was actually aged 48. Widow of John Chapman, a coachman, and the cause of death is violent injuries, throat and abdomen by a sharp instrument. Willful murder against person or persons unknown. And the certificate was received once again from Win Edwin Baxter, coroner for Middlesex, and the inquest was held from the 10th to the 12th of September, with the final hearing on the 26th of September 1888, and the death was registered the day after on the 27th. And there is Annie and John on their wedding day in 1869. And a zoomed in and much enhanced copy of Annie's face. And like with all our other ladies that we've visited, of course, leave tuppence, and very much a God bless you to Annie's memory. And what a fine tribute, eh? From her little memorial over there that was placed in 2008 to this one, which is very recent. And what a remarkable job and a fine tribute the cemetery has done. This is excellent. And Annie's stone looks out on the area in which she's buried. Somewhere under all this deep earth are the undisturbed remains of Annie Chapman. And from her grave and memory, it's to our next cemetery and our next victim, the third acknowledged victim, and it's to East London Cemetery. So off we go. And it's to East London Cemetery I've brought you in Plaistow, London E13, the cemetery I'm most familiar with because most of my lot are buried here. And it's to the grave of the third acknowledged victim that I'll be taking you, Elizabeth Stride. So you'll join me within the cemetery. We're now inside the cemetery and it only has one entrance. You walk straight down until you come to the war memorials here. And the Vasello mausoleum there. And what you'll want to do is turn left and walk straight down to the end here where you'll join me next. Then you'll come to this bend in the road or pathway. You'll want to turn right looking back from where we've come at the war memorial. Oh, it's very cold today and I foolishly felt warm indoors, so I put a thinner jacket on. It's freezing brass monkeys, London look. And you're going to want to walk straight down. She is easy to find, but I'd like to give directions where possible, which is why I've done that where I can. You'll come to a waste bin here, but this little track with two trees either side of it, and note the gradient of this hill, about 5 foot higher when you get onto the top of it from where we actually are, and that falls into the story of Elizabeth Stride's grave. She was buried in a common grave, as we'll discuss in a little while. Common graves in the areas were often reused. Now this area had so many common graves in it that reusing it just wasn't really feasible without exhuming lots and lots and lots of people. So what the cemetery did was to pile all this earth on here, which would allow them to go down far enough for new burials without disturbing the old. So this gravestone here, and there has been a few over the years and a couple have been vandalised, marks the approximate last resting place of Elizabeth Stride. She is definitely in this area somewhere, but extremely deep down. So the grave of Elizabeth Stride, 1843 to 1888, also known as Long Lizzie because of her height. And this has been done in recent times, these granite cobbles, and done by the cemetery. They look after this grave very well. So for some historical information, Elizabeth Stride was buried on the morning of Saturday the 6th of October 1888 in East London Cemetery, located within the East End London district of Plaistow. Her funeral was attended by a small number of mourners, and the costs were provided at the expense of the parish by the undertaker and Mr. Hawkes. Now, this is a common grave, what Elizabeth was in, and what we have to bear in mind, in the Victorian and Edwardian era, most of what people referred to as paupers were buried on a Saturday morning. So it wouldn't have been an expensive affair for poor old Elizabeth. Her headstone, which is a later addition, is inscribed with her name and the years of her birth and death. Before we leave Elizabeth Stride, and here we have the death certificate for Elizabeth Stride. Died 30th of September 1888 in a court at the side of 40 Burner Street, St George's. Aged 45, widow of John Thomas Stride, a carpenter, and her cause of death was hemorrhage due to partial severance of the left carotid artery and severance of the trachea. Once again, the certificate was received from Wyn Edwin Baxter, coroner for Middlesex. The inquest was held from the 1st to the 5th of October, with a final hearing on the 23rd of October, and the verdict wilful murder against person or persons unknown, and the death was registered the day after the final hearing on the 24th of October. The face of Elizabeth Stride. And like with our other ladies at the City of London Cemetery, we will leave twopence and very much a God bless you to Elizabeth Stride, and bear her grave in mind, because we will return to this spot when we discuss were there more victims. Now, from here, East London Cemetery, I have to take you to St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone, so we'll do that by map. So we'll be leaving the grave of Elizabeth Stride now, and you'll be joining me at St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery at the grave of the last victim, Mary Jane Kelly. So let's say goodbye and a God bless you to Elizabeth Stride once more. Good morning, ladies and gents, and you join me on Langthorne Road in Leytonstone for St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery, and it's for the grave of our last acknowledged victim of Jack the Ripper, Mary Jane, or Mary Jeanette Kelly. And her grave is not too far away from the entrance gate, so I'll walk you to it for anyone that may wish to visit. Come in the gate, you'll see the chapel there. You'll want to walk around the side of the chapel. There is the chapel. got the chapel there, so you'll walk around the back of it. And it's this path here. So, chapel there, this way. And what you'll be looking out for is a statue of a young lad with his arms crossed, with his foot on a football, which is to our right. And you'll walk past this breeze block. I don't know whether it's a bin or part of an old vault or something. I think it's for rubbish, I think. And here is the grave there with the young lad that you're looking for. And Mary Jane is next to him. Now what we have to remember is, like with many of our other ladies, Mary Jane was buried in a common grave. This area was reused in the 1940s for new burials, 1949 in the case of this particular patch. And what they did was, once again, to pile on loads of earth to allow for new burials without interrupting the old. So Mary Jane is under here in this section. This marks her approximate resting place, but exactly where she is no one really knows. In more recent years, people trying to solve the Jack the Ripper mystery have asked if Mary Jane could be exhumed, so DNA could be got and things like that. But as the cemetery said, the area has been reused. To find Mary Jane, you would have to disturb hundreds, possibly thousands of other people. Also, as well, when exhumations have occurred in this area, the ground has been found to be very, very waterlogged, and the remains very badly preserved. So that would not be on the side of DNA. And most importantly, I think it's just a case of let the poor lady rest in peace. In loving memory of Mary Jeanette Kelly. None but the lonely hearts can know my sadness. Love lives forever. Mary Jane Kelly was buried at 2 p.m. on Monday the 19th of November 1888. She was laid to rest in St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone in a service officiated by the Reverend Father Columbine. No family members could be located to attend her funeral, and both Joseph Barnett and her landlord John McCarthy were insistent her remains be interred in accordance with the rituals of her church. The 8 individuals within the 2 mourning coaches following Kelly's polished elm and oak coffin from Shoreditch Church to the cemetery where she was buried were Joseph Barnett, an individual representing John McCarthy, and 6 women who had known Kelly and who had testified at the inquest into her murder. Mary Ann Cox, Elizabeth Prater, Caroline Maxwell, Sarah Lewis, Julia Venturi and Maria Harvey. Several thousand people gathered outside Shoreditch Church to observe the funeral procession. Kelly's obituary ran as follows. The funeral of the murdered woman, Kelly, has once more been postponed. Deceased was a Catholic, and the man Barnett with whom she lived, and her landlord, Mr. McCarthy, desired her remains to be interred with the ritual of her church. The funeral will therefore take place tomorrow, the 19th of November, Roman Catholic Cemetery, Leytonstone. The hearse will leave Shoreditch Mortuary at 12:30. The remains of Mary Jane, who was murdered on the 9th of November in Miller's Court, Dorset Street, Spitalfields, were brought yesterday morning from Shoreditch Mortuary to the cemetery in Leytonstone, where they were interred. No family members could be found to attend the funeral. The inscription upon Kelly's later gravestone reads, in loving memory of Mary Jeanette Kelly, None but the lonely hearts can know my sadness. Love lives forever. And before we leave Mary Jane, and here we have the death certificate for Mary Jane, or Mary Jeanette Kelly, otherwise Davies. And out of all the death certificates we've seen, it's the most interesting, and I'll discuss that with you in a minute. Died 9th of November 1888 at 1 Millers Court, Christchurch. Mary Jeanette Kelly, otherwise Davies, aged about 25 years, and that's where, as Matt explained to us on night one, where a lot of the mystery comes into Mary Jane, because no one really knew anything about her, including her age. And this is where the most interesting thing with this certificate comes in. Of all the certificates we've seen, this is the only one that has occupation listed as a prostitute, and as Matt told us, Mary Jane was the only professional prostitute out of the colloquial 5 or acknowledged victims. And the cause of death was severance of the carotid artery, willful murder against some person or persons unknown, violent. And the certificate was received from a different coroner this time, R. MacDonald, coroner for Middlesex, and the inquest was very short and sweet and dealt with on one day, the 12th of November, and that was done, as Matt explained to us, because she was a prostitute, and it's an awful thing to say, they didn't waste much time on her. And I've been able to up my ante here. A massive thanks to the cemetery staff at St Patrick's for allowing me into the office and to take this photograph of the original burial record. And it's the original burial entry for Mary Jeanette Kelly, which will be marked with an arrow now. And she was buried on Monday the 19th of November 1888 at 2 p.m. in grave number 66, row 66, plot 10. Mary Jeanette Kelly, buried 19th of November, age 25, and from where received, Shoreditch Mortuary. And as I discussed before, there are no known images of Mary Jane Kelly. But very, very recently, this image has come to light, and this is alleged, so it's only a possible, alleged to be a photograph of Mary Jane Kelly, and this is from the Casebook of Jack the Ripper forums. So we can't say for certain, but you could be looking at the face of Mary Jane Kelly, the last acknowledged victim of Jack the Ripper. And as I say, Mary Jane was the last acknowledged victim of Jack the Ripper. So, on that note, leave a twopence for her amongst the many, and a God bless you to her memory. And it's lovely to see she's many fresh flowers on her. So, there we are. That's the approximated last resting place of Mary Jane, or Mary Jeanette Kelly. And our opening theme tune on night one was the song that was sung by Mary Jane Kelly on the last night of her life.
To cheer me now, we've
God bless her, eh? And from Mary Jane, or Mary Jeanette, to our next segment of Were There More Victims?